to address the topic of this conference, which actually is global dwelling. Global is a concept that is also in the title of the project, a global network for research and learning. So it's an important concept for us. It's not something that is there only for putting a name. So that's why it's the theme of the conference, global dwelling. And when I introduced the conference the first day yesterday, I made a first attempt to define what global would mean in the context of the project and in the context of this conference. And I only wrote 3 of these possible meanings. And I would like now to start this discussion about what other meanings we could add to this list, what global means for you. Also, this discussion is open for anybody in the floor. What can we understand for global in this project? And actually, global should be a concept that I think we have to address from the research point of view in the reader or in the Wikipedia, but it's something I'm afraid we cannot skip. So I wrote here 3 acceptions, possible acceptions of global. The first one is to acknowledge the existence of common driving forces influencing the contemporary habitat at different cultures, societies, and places. The idea of globality in terms of space, time, and culture. The second meaning I tried to give here in this presentation was that global would mean to adopt an inclusive approach to solve the so-called housing problems involving all actors. And this has to do mainly with participation, one of the main issues we have discussed here in these last 2 days. And the third meaning, it had to do more with the interdisciplinarity, how to bring not the actors, but the different subject matters, disciplines, bodies of knowledge. To open the floor and to open the discussion here on the table, I would like to ask if you think of another meaning that we could add. I could also ask if you think if these acceptions correspond or not to the concept of global, if you like. Both are the 2 starting questions. If you recognize the characteristic of global in these definitions, and if you have any other proposal. So I would like to start with Claire on the right side.
Yes.
Yes.
I try to answer this terrible challenge.
Well, it's just a brainstorming.
Yes, it was such an intensive day, and I learned a lot. I don't know if I can answer your question, but I learned a lot about desires, and actually about your desires. I mean, desires of architects, planners, social scientists, those who intervene in changing urban context or even at a very small scale. So my first remark would be about, are we sure that we know what we do when we intervene in a context? I mean, the interplay of actors that has been mentioned several times takes, of course, another dimension with the globalization. And thinking in terms of weak and strong or stronger or even worldwide actors make the thing a bit vertiginous, because how could we figure out a scene of participation with actors which are so unequal? And I think the thinking of this feature into the globalization, embedded into a larger understanding thanks to the globalization issue, would be quite interesting. For instance, coming back to the Latin America context, I'm not an expert, but what does it mean that a municipality is pushing for participatory process? Or in France, which I a bit better know, what does it mean that we have implemented in the law the obligation of participation in the social housing sector? The tenants have to participate. What does it mean? And I come back to this, je participe, tu participes, nous participons, ils profitent. And this is a bit the idea of the instrumentalization of all these processes. So it doesn't mean that globalization must bring us to think, well, it's a fatal issue and we cannot change anything because the drivers and the over-determination, as Bourdieu should say, are too strong and nothing can be changed. But at the same time, it would not be very useful to have this attitude. But we have to be concerned with this globalization and this enormous strengths of the drivers. I was in Mexico very recently, and the strengths of the builders of the Infonavit, which is able to develop enormous neighborhood in the middle of the desert, it's very striking. So how can you bring together in participatory processes such unequal actors? But at the same time, being pessimistic doesn't lead to anything. And the optimistic way is also good because it's about desire to learn from people, to learn from where you intervene. But in this learning, I think, of course, we must not be naive, and we must also consider what is our interest. Even as sociologists, sometimes when we make interviews, we should consider that people expect something from us, whatever it can be, to intervene for them, to have a priority in the waiting lists or whatever. So the issue of interests, clientelism, corruption is maybe, but okay, so the first thing is, yes, I'm sure that social science can help to cool down a bit and look at the situation and the structuration of society as it is. Then maybe I was very interested in that. In this session, we started from global housing and then we came to global city. And of course, what I know is from Saskia Sassen and other sociologists from North America, from Europe, who are also dealing with globalization as a process of worldwide division of work. So this completely over-determinated in a way also the construction of the city and the construction of housing, but it would require a long time to talk about that. What I can just add, and then I think it will be all, there were also features which were absent of the debate, such as history and memory. And I think it's also challenging because we know that we come from a certain history, and our neighborhoods, our cities are also the results and the legacy of the past. So, for instance, I think there was one project with the demolition. When you demolish, you exercise to a certain extent violence against what has been done by the previous generation. So how can you keep the memory? Is it useful to keep the memory? Is a good design or a good project also a project will be able to take in account the memory issue? I don't know why history is so little considered as a value, but I think it would be worth to use it. About inequalities and the worldwide division of work, there are useful studies, a field of studies which is subaltern studies. Those who work with India and other continents may know. And the Spivak question, can the subaltern speak, is also to put in the question, can they speak? Can they take part to this collaborative process, participatory process? Of course, the answer is, she says no, they can't. But the answer is very difficult. But what the question maybe is, can they speak? But furthermore, can they be listened to? And I think this is quite challenging to have the right place and be able to say, yes, the knowledge I took from the people I interviewed or from whoever they are is something that I can take into account in my research, in my design, etc. A last thing that is not mentioned is the symbolic dimension of housing as a value, a neighborhood as a value. Its symbolic dimension. I'm convinced that the green spaces are very interesting for creating sociability, inclusiveness, etc. But I'm also convinced that those green spaces are talking for the inhabitants. Are they well maintained? Are they, do they look nice, etc.? The symbolic, even if they don't use it, I remember people saying, I have a very nice complex of sport and green space. Do you go there? No, I never go, but it's so important to have it here. So it's symbolically very important, and the reputation also is something, the image, etc. So yes, I just want to mention, then this will be my last remark, but I don't think that, lots of studies show that belonging, the sense of belonging and the sense of being part of a community, locally designed, I mean, localized somewhere, is only a part of the question. And for instance, the global city is with research like Martin Albro, there is a reader, The Global City, and he says, he shows that the inhabitants are belonging to the place where they live, but they also belong, each of them have what he calls a sociosphere, which is a sphere of belonging that is worldwide, that goes to Africa, to the Caribbean, or whoever. And this is also part of the question, because the inhabitant is just the one who has kind of roots somewhere. So the globalization issue is really interesting, and I'm sure that social sciences can find the way to be connected with the planning and architecture. And okay, thank you. It was so interesting.
Thank you for these final reflections. Yeah, just let me pick up one idea from the end. You have to probably leave
Yes.
in.
So sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I will continue with one of at least one idea I got from these final words. The global inhabitant is not rooted anywhere. It's just around, right? And maybe that's one of the characteristics of the inhabitant, the global inhabitant, that is not in one place. The place is everywhere, and also the symbolism and the behaviors and everything are also in a way global. So it's not that we are living in a particular place anymore, right? Maybe that's another characteristic of this global inhabitant. That was something I picked up in the final words from Claire. So maybe, I don't know if the question still makes sense, but how do you see the characteristic of being global, talking about dwelling? Where do you see this characteristic, how we can define it in dwelling?
Well, I don't think I know how to define it, but thinking a little bit, I think global for me is something that could apply to everyone, but of course in a different concept, in a different culture, in a different movement. It has specifically, it's not that we are all the same. We're not in the same moment. We have different stories, we have exactly, but I think it's something that it could apply for all of us. That's why when we talk about sustainability, or when we talk about participation, I think it's something that could apply for all of us, but of course it's not the same. It could be completely different. And even in a same country, if I, for example, come back again to the experience in Chile, I can't say that within Chile, the issue of participation is global. It's not. Maybe some municipalities are aware of that, or some municipalities think that is good to promote it, but it's not. It's that I think the issue of participation, or as many other issues, is not something that you have to imposed. It's something that you have to be convinced. You have to be really, you have to be, you have to think that doing it in another way, things could be better. I think what's the issue, what has to do is that public policy has always been like trying to help people or trying to provide services on a special or on a specific way. What participation is trying to change is that what and how is that going to be? It's not that there's not going to be public intervention or public services, but it will make a difference, or I hope it will make a difference. I'm convinced. But of course it's not easy because it's time consuming. We all know that people must most of the time say, well, no, I don't have time for that. Or it's difficult because we know little how to do it, or how's the methodology we have to try to put forward in each case. Or it's difficult because the staff members of any institution don't also know how to do it and think that it's now needed. And it's, I don't know, it's because most of the time it hasn't gone right, so people don't believe that the next time will be better or will have some succeed. So it's difficult, but I think it's not because it's difficult, it's being difficult, we should leave it. And I just wanted to mention that I think someone, I can't remember who said it, but I think it's absolutely necessary to teach the architect students from that area. I believe, of course, in terms of multidisciplinary, I'm completely agree on that. But looking from my perspective, from the architectural side of view, I think we have to teach or introduce the students in this new way or this new way of doing design. And when I was in the School of Architecture, of course, this was not exist. So we thought that we know exactly how to do things, and we know exactly how to design, and we're supposed to interpret the way of living of everybody. So we won't have any problem on that. I think that's not the issue today. But that has to be learned. You have to be convinced, you have to understand, you have to practice, you have to experience, and you have to work on that, and it's a long way. So that's, I think it's important. But at the same time, I think we have to teach our students to become citizens, because if not, I think we have to combine both things. We have to combine being professional, but also being citizens.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important to develop that issue, although it's still some becoming like a lot to do.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So indeed, two of the images from the many we have seen in the last 2 days, which are in a way retained in my memory, are and happened in two or three presentations, was comparing, for example, this morning, the picture from Ekim, the hand of Le Corbusier over Paris compared to the many hands acting over the model, and there were another image similar to that in another presentation. That indicates that in a way there's a certain agreement that this idea of the demiurge trying to tell how to live and having the moral conviction and having the commission, the social commission to do that role is heavily under question at the moment, it seems. And maybe that's also something that we can agree, it seems, from different cultural perspectives, that we are seeking for something else now, and that's the adaptation of the new role of the architect in front of these new conditions. I think I'm interpreting what you are saying. About the global condition, in the vernacular architecture and the modern movement architecture, in my view, I think there's a certain trend. I don't know if it is linear or going backwards now, but if we compare the vernacular architecture as that particular construction, what is coming directly from the place, from the culture of the place, from the climate, the materials, the economy, the way of living, everything that is materialized in that what we call vernacular architecture. When it came the modern movement program of the housing, the modern housing, it just replaced that idea of being there altogether by something else, which is the idea that the house responds not to the condition of the place, but to an idea, and the idea of the industrialization, the idea of progress, And that perhaps was the first step in the direction of globality. But I'm not sure if now the global situation of housing is just the next step after the industrialization, or we are actually going backwards now, trying to combine both the idea of progress, the idea of modernity, of the modern movement, together with the idea of being local, the need to be local, to be specific to a community, to a particular place. This is a reflection only. Maybe Maria wants to say something now.
Yeah. I also have some now. My notes look very. I hope that I can make my story out of these notes. What does global mean? Well, reflecting upon what we have discussed these days, I think that it means our common elements of concern. So we all come from very different localities, different realities, but there are very clear common elements that we deal with, that we wonder about, and that we like to develop further. The one that I wrote down here before you asked about what means global, but I think it applies, and what has been, I think, an important element these days is sustainability. And of course, sustainability is now such a large concept that it is almost meaningless. But we have seen the two elements of sustainability. I think there is a very strong concern with the environmental sustainable housing. So we have seen the debates on energy and on building materials, and should building materials be local, and so that is a debate of sustainability in housing. And on the other side, we have seen a debate on the social sustainability at different levels, I would say. The house, and how can the house be more user-friendly. Community, but also the city level. Very clearly, yesterday in the research, in the research presentations, I think we have seen the call for inclusive city by explaining processes of exclusion through gentrification. We've seen that from Budapest, gentrification, eviction, the resettlement proposal, and even your public housing story. Although people were, you told about it later. Although people were much more happy with their house, they felt that their quality of life was not the same after they lived in that house, because the location of the house and the access to the amenities of the city was not the same as where they lived before. So that makes indeed this whole the house within the context of the city and the house within the context of an urban life important. I think we have discussed very much this, how to create inclusive cities, and the highlight of discussion has been the community participation as an instrument to create more inclusiveness. You also have put here as an element the multidisciplinary perspective. Can I say something about that? Yes. Yep. I think that as a multidisciplinary team, as we are, we have probably still to come to understand each other's language better. We felt especially also, we feel that also in our institute, which is also multidisciplinary. And also here, there is such a different approach, for instance, to research among the social scientists and among the architects, designers, and planners. So how can we meet in these two different cultures and make a meaningful interdisciplinary approach to these important issues? So the question is, how can we create a truly multidisciplinary housing research so far?
Okay. Thank you. So, Jim?
Yeah, I represent the improvised member on the panel here, so I'm not going to say very much, but thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it. And I think it's huge. It's so big, this, and we can't solve everything. I think we have to admit this. I've written down a few things here that local versus global, act locally, think globally. That's one of the big catchphrases, if you like, of the green movement, I think. And definitely in terms of pedagogy and teaching our students, we're teaching them to learn, and they're learning to learn. And if we set projects locally, but all the time trying to open their minds to global issues, I think they'll be able to deal with many issues around the world. I mean, one of the key things we should be a mandatory course in all schools of architecture is climatic design, and drilling it into students really from first year as to why certain architectures have developed in certain parts of the world, and why certain materials are used in certain parts of the world and not in other parts of the world, which is it's total common sense in a way, and it often gives a great sense of place to architecture and housing as well. So that's something to consider. The other thing I've written down here is waste management, which is so crucial, particularly with the incredible densification of our cities and the figures that we heard this afternoon, I think in the last presentation, but 80% of the people are going to live in cities by 2020. That's the prediction, and how we deal with waste. And it's such an integral part of housing as well. And, trying to convince colleagues to put this in the program so students think about it, trying to get the students to think about it in a sensible way. So it's a completely integral part of sustainability that needs to be included. Lastly, in terms of interdisciplinary projects, I've touched on it a bit in my paper, and I mean, I'm partly torn between a softly approach and a big bang, as we call it. In other words, but I do fundamentally think we need to change the way we educate students and move away from what Jeremy Till calls the black box, taken from the last essay of Rainer Banham, the black box of this exclusive club in terms of how architects are educated, and have much more interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary projects throughout the students' education, and even, I mean, one of the ideals of OIKONET, I believe, is to try and educate our students through online participations, etc. So there's a global sense to that, and technology allows that to happen now, but it seems incredibly difficult. We find it difficult to have an interdisciplinary project with two different disciplines within the same building. So there's some thoughts and I'd much prefer responding to people's own thoughts and questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the last comment, I think.
Yes,
please.
I just wanted to mention something that Claire said at the last part, is the issue of the history, or the issue of the memory. And I was thinking that in April we have a very big fire in Valparaiso, and I can't remember the figure, but it was a huge number of families who they lost their houses. And of course, well, the first thing that the government or the municipality think that it has to do is just to house those people, and that's absolutely necessary. But there's a lot of groups, and most of them universities from Santiago and from Valparaiso, that we have been working on that. And one of the issues that everybody was talking that it was needed to do is just to try to work with the people what they wanted to restore. That's nothing to do with the physical aspect, but it was like the meaning of the space that they had before. Most of those were absolutely informal sectors, so they were not planned sectors. Mainly that was the reason, because the fire was so hard, because there was no, probably there were located in places that they were not should have been. But this issue of trying to help them to restore their memories on those places was very important and very significant. And I think that is what I think this issue of global and local today is very difficult to say, because we cannot escape from the global, but at the same time we need to be local, because at the local level we have our memories or our history. So it's difficult to combine both things.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can give the opportunity to anybody on the floor who wants to say something about the discussion. Can give the microphone. If there is the urgent need to say something, and the force, energy. Thank you. The question, please.
It was me. No, I was thinking of global. For me, one aspect has to do with capitalism, market, quickly moving money, vad säger upplösning? Vad ska man säga det? That ties are, we are losing. It's not the wholeness that is guiding the movement. It's rather the separate interest that is governing. And for me, what we need, why local is important, is because it's in the local that we can work with wholeness and connecting and identity, and there we also need the global. But one aspect for me, because in the area I work, it's we meet the aspect of migration, people that have come together from all over the world, and we really are trying to see how can we come together and create something and get rooted both in place and in relationships, in community building. And that's for me why participation is an important aspect then. But for me, I'm finding myself in a very strong move of urban movement, of diversity, of big change, and a lot of confusion in Sweden. What do we do about it? And the answer for us has been to close the door instead of going out and try and connect and find each other in a new way then. So that's the thought I get. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I was asleep when this was mentioned. Urbanization and globalization. I'm just wondering how we can put the two into perspective, especially when we talk about things like aging and population aging, especially in developed countries, and how we combine that with urbanization in developing countries. If you look a little bit beyond the next couple of decades, how do you see the population of Europe, for example? We're talking about people, more and more people moving into the cities, so more and more bigger cities, mega cities, and I'm very happy that Jim mentioned things like waste management, which is going to be an issue to be considered. How do you combine this trend of urbanization in developing countries, more people, more population in those areas, compared to developed world where the population will be decreasing? You will have more people of older age. You will have ghost cities, empty cities. Can you reflect on these two trends, two probably conflicting trends? I'm talking to the panel or anybody from the floor.
Well, it's a really interesting point, I think, and one way might be to have a more humane approach to transmigration, than Europe has at the moment, for example. sees it as such a problem. When I'll just give you an example from Ireland. We have these centres where migrants have been put. Some of them for the last 9 years, they get €19 a week to live on. Father, mother, and child live in one room together. They're going on hunger strike now to try to draw attention to their situation. Most of them from Africa, and it's becoming a real issue. And this is in Little Ireland, and I know obviously other countries in Europe have issues, but these migrants are looking for a better life, so keen to work and contribute. Yet there's this terrible fear created about them. So that might be one way to help solve this imbalance that may come with what you described with the aging population, and accept that our world is changing, but it can be a positive change if social justice prevails. Sorry, just before you start, the other way, of course, is to address the housing issue too. What's called this third age generation, and we're our next project in DIT after Christmas is going to be in timber again, but it's going to be for elderly people. So that'll upset the students even more. But it's how we're perhaps trying to recognise that it's an issue, and that the other thing to remember is that older people are much more mobile now than they were 20, 50 years ago, and they're leading a very different lifestyle, and there have been various studies done on that. So it's a very interesting age to be coming into.
Thank you very much for this concluding plenary. For me, it's very, very interesting and useful to combine all this information with this statement. And my question or feeling which raising during your words, your presentations, is about these dimensions of housing or global housing. And actually, Maria is totally right that we discussed, and not only discussed during these days, but we are teaching a lot about environmental sustainability. We have knowledges and methods about social sustainability. But if you are thinking about global housing, this economic sustainability or effective solutions are very, very important as well. As I yesterday showed in this first presentation about these driving forces. And from my experience and perspective, we are not, architects are not experts in this field, but in this post-crisis situation, it's really a very, very important topic, this effectiveness, effective solutions, not only environmentally effective or socially effective, but economically effective. It's task for a leader.
Yeah.
Any further comments?
The last comment, I believe. Thank you. It has been such a teaching for 2 days. Mm-hmm. And this global term is very tricky, I believe, because even if this housing thing is internationally a big problem for everyone, the implementation and, all the solutions are to the point every time. So what do you think about it? Can you, implement one particular solution to some other cases, or are they requiring different things? What do you think about it?
Yeah. Can I? Yeah, I would like to say something about it. because of course each situation requires its own tailored solution. But I think that what we also have seen these days, and what is certainly true as far as I'm concerned, is we're also all part of certain trends. Yeah, we're part of economic trends, social trends, governance trends, the thinking about what society should look like, which is influenced by indeed global tendencies. So we can also meet each other on that level, let's say, not on the implementation level, but yes, on the type of principles behind what you want to implement. So I don't believe that you can take the experience from let's say from Sweden and implement it in Zimbabwe, but you can look at the principles behind it and see, oh, we have something in common. So maybe we should do something with those commonalities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I fully agree with this comment. The question and the difficulty is to find which these commonalities are. Some of them have been mentioned here, like sustainability, like this need for participation in different ways, but it's everywhere. Before, it was more located in some cultural areas, but now we find and we have seen it here in the presentations, issue about participation all over Europe and also South America, which is already a tradition. But these are the trends that we assume as that has to be like this. And like in other times, we assume that industrialization was the way forward. Now we assume that it has to be sustainable. We have to be aware of the environment. We have to be aware of the people. And all of these things are part of, I think, of these characteristics of being global. Now, the way that this is manifested in Istanbul or in a country in Nigeria or in Lagos or in South America has a different physical and social form. But probably the underlying forces, which is what we call here global, which affect the way of thinking, the economy, the political frame, which is also shared. Also, the symbolism that we mentioned before about the house and what people expect from the house is also maybe global in a way. All of these characteristics are part of this concept. But I guess everybody knows the concept of local, right? Like the juxtaposition of the two terms just to express that one cannot exist without the other. So the other thing is that, I mean, we put together in a kind of provocation global dwelling, because dwelling, as the fact of living, has to be somewhere in some place and some time with some people. We talk about dwelling. I mean, you can, but to put it together with global, it looks like a provocation and look almost like an oxymoron in a way that it's either one or the other, but cannot be both, unless literally you are really living globally, meaning that you are living here and there, and all your life is spread in many different places, which is also the case. But it seems that it's like a contradiction in terms, right? The global and dwelling, either the local and the global. But I think our solutions today to the dwelling comes from this contraposition, from these two terms, from this tension between one and the other, because we cannot escape from one or the other. We could be completely global or completely local, but still the other component would be there as a reference, I guess. No.
Yeah, there's one at the back there.
Yeah.
So talking about the global housing, it should be mentioned somehow a recent crisis which very much affected people in transitional countries. And it is very much obvious that those regional or global players like bank, they are not willing to implement same level of social responsibility, and they are not providing the same services, let's say, in Italy, in Germany, or in Austria, if you do see how they behave in transitional countries. They do have the very much different services, and people, ordinary people, very much rely which kind of services they are selling there. In fact, there they are playing a role of market speculator, and it is definitely prohibited in their country to be market speculator. Then the problem is, who is going to put those issues of financialization on the agenda of in those countries? With the professionals, with the civil society, with the media. Media is very much also controlled. Media is in favor of those who are earning money on the global market. And the money they earn there in that part of the region very much affected, especially knowing now the troubles of those families who do have loans recalculated in Swiss franc. It was typical speculation. But somehow my estimation would be that we will wait somehow for the first decision of European Court of Human Rights. Association from my country, they are very much strong. They are people from younger generation. They made appeal to the European Constitution, Court on Human Rights, saying that what they got as a housing loans, that they were not a real service to help them, but it was a real speculation. And it is not the problem of one country, it is a problem of, I would say, all transitional countries there. The same case was in Austria. Then Austrian government came and then they resolved the problem and they recognized that problem as a kind of the public debt. But other countries, the other governments are not enough strong to undertake such action in favor of their citizens. But definitely it will be, it is currently affecting of the life of 100,000 of mostly younger families from, let's say, middle income part of the societies. If you do have any comments, if you do, I hope that you do have more or less somehow same situation here in Spain.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
I think it's essential point you make. During the Celtic Tiger years in Ireland, say from 96 to 2006, at the high point in the early 2000s, 60%, over 60% of the government tax take was from the construction industry. And that was mainly to do with housing. So it's clear that like that was the income of, that was how the government was running the country, which is why it went into such a mess. So it's clear that housing was seen as a, you know, as a speculation, and industry was ignored and wasn't built up properly. And then when the recession came, it was horrific. And yeah, Ireland is experiencing this kind of thing now. We have this total irony where we have empty houses around the country, ghost estates. We have people, so many people homeless, trying to buy a home, trying to get a home. And we have others being kicked out of their home. All happening now at the same time, being kicked out because they can't afford their mortgages, like you say. So I think society has to find a way to provide housing without reliance on the market in the way it does. That has to be a key aspiration for us all, because it's such a basic need. It's like food, it's shelter, it's listed in the UN Charter as a basic need. So that's something. I mean, I don't have a solution, but I agree with that it's a problem.
Yeah, the situation in Spain is
worse.
Exactly. I'm not sure if it's worse, but it's exactly the same thing, the same situation. That, and maybe that's another attribute we can put to the concept of global, which is that housing has become a commodity. Like in Ireland, there are many houses here in Spain. They were built and they have been never inhabited, and probably they will be never inhabited. But they changed hands several times because the investment value was increasing every time that they were bought and sold. So maybe they passed through different hands, increasing the value, and nobody ever probably lived in those places. And this is the paradox of compared to the situation after the Second World War, where the real problem was to facilitate shelter to people who did not have it, and it was a real problem in terms of investment, materials, Now the paradox is that we had the resources, economic and technological, to provide millions of apartments, and they are there built and empty, because they are not houses in the sense that they were. They are commodities. They are investment values that they were built in order to make money from the land, from reselling, and so on. And everybody participated, so it's not a matter of, I'm not sure it's only the banks. I think it was more a social phenomenon altogether, with the banks probably behind always. But I think everybody was part of the process, I guess, many people, right? That's my experience from.
Well, I'm very happy that you mentioned this, because somehow I can't help thinking that this has, during the entire conference, kind of been the elephant in the room. That housing, yes, from our professional perspectives, is about dwelling, about people, about places, about physical structures. But probably the most important aspect of housing is real estate, because that's the most important driving factor in the generation of housing. And it's also the most important factor for all the other issues relating to housing, such as displacement, etc. And I mean, all the way down to the physical shape of housing. When our uninhabited friend yesterday talked about Nepal, in the Valley of Nepal, which to many who haven't been there recently is probably some kind of fairy tale country up in the valley of Kathmandu, it's actually also big Chinese and South Korean housing construction companies moving in now, building the same stupid 20-story housing estates like anywhere else. So that's also really a very important aspect of the global nature of housing.
I want to add something, because we talked about commodity. Just to highlight an example I saw in China, and a Chinese guy who did very interesting research, he drew us 4 graphs. And they were, you can hear me? He drew 4 graphs and they were identical, just to highlight the shift in society in China. And imagine, you're talking about a massive country. So the graphs basically is a very sharp curve, and then it flattens. So it started with the televisions. After that, the mobile phone. Next, the cars. What's next? The 4th one? Housing. The 4th one, house. But the 4th one is still at the beginning, still the same, exactly the same pattern, which is quite amazing. And I think if we observe China, is quite dramatic change. And I will add one more thing about China, because we should really look at it carefully as when we do more research, is that they're having this phenomenon called the 2-4-8. Anybody heard of it? A young married couple is caring for the parents of both, and is caring for the parents of the parents, or the grandparents. So these young couples, they're caring for like 12 people. It's like a massive time bomb. It's gonna blow up, and I don't know what they're gonna do about it, considering that they have more than 100 million 80 plus. 100 million. So I think China, we need to observe it very carefully, because it's like, and there's lots of apparently research money coming in now between EU, China, and so on, that could really help us into understanding these global challenges that are coming from the largest country on the planet. And I think there's a lot to learn there.
Can I just respond to Nikolai, and not contradicting you, but recognizing that, yes, the commodity in real estate seems to be in control, but there are other models there in history, in the last 100 years, where some of the best housing produced occurred on a kind of either state-funded or voluntary basis. And Leandro mentioned the Second World War. I mentioned that after the First World War, we're celebrating we're commemorating the 100th anniversary of it now throughout Europe. So huge housing programs are done throughout Europe, state-funded or with minimal taxes on individuals. Like we mentioned, Frankfurt is a great example, inspired by the Garden City movement. And not only in terms of the figures of the houses produced in a very short few years, but a lot of experiments done in terms of house improvements. The Frankfurt kitchen was developed etc. You had the Homes Fit for Heroes program in Britain, which spread to Ireland as well, because Ireland had just got independence, but quite a lot of Irish had served in the British Army in the First World War. So Britain built homes for them in Ireland, even though Ireland had become independent. So there were programs in Amsterdam through both Catholic and Protestant housing associations, competing with each other, but incredibly innovative housing programs. And there's no reason why. I mean, what is mind-boggling, I think, is that and I railed against this during the Celtic Tiger years, when we were able to build houses in Ireland in the 1930s based on the Amsterdam School. Architects were sent over to study the Amsterdam School, came back, built government houses, which are still very solid housing blocks that can be renovated and reused, and yet we've allowed the stuff to happen that I've described earlier in the last 10 years. So there's something wrong, and one of the reasons it's wrong is due to bad planning, too many vested interest groups, a lot of corruption. There's no question of it. In Ireland, the banks and developers, some people have gone to jail over it, etc. So we have to look at these other models that exist of either part state funding or semi-public bodies, part voluntary bodies, and there are lots of them out there, lots of them in Britain and Ireland at least.
Okay, so I think we can, thank you, Jim. Maybe we can close the conference here. I think it was necessary to have these final reflections at the end. Only to thank you again, everybody, for attending.